Greetings, welcome to Powered by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Grace Kunadu. On this episode, we're going to talk about how being negative can impact you in ways that you will not often realize, and what you can do about it. So let's jump right into it. We're going to start with a story. And so the story is about a man, but it could be a woman, but it's about a man. And this man thought that he had most, if not all, the answers to the world. And so he lived his life from a teenager onward, thinking that, he knew what it was to know, and began to essentially live his life out that way. His mood was often stoic and arrogant, and at times, off-putting. Nonetheless, as he grew older into his 20s and 30s, he began to, rather than tone it down, he began to be more, of what he was displaying in terms of his attitude and idea. And what he didn't realize is that in his mode of self-righteousness, that is, he thought that he was perhaps the most righteous of them all, and he thought that others were beneath him or not worthy to be in his company or his presence, began to fall into this very important trap that actually prompted this particular video today about how being negative can actually affect you when you think it's affecting others. So all the while, he is building this resume. He's building this tower of negativity in action and in thought that he thinks is more about other people's weakness, other people's anxieties, other people's insecurities, and it's not about him. That is, whenever, he had a harsh or off-putting remark, it was about, well, you are weak-minded, or you are in your feelings, or you need to work that out because that's your problem, not mine. And so with that kind of attitude, over the years, he began to build this resume, right? He began to build this tower, of track record. And what he failed to realize, like many of us fail to realize, is that everything that we think, do, and say is recorded. So like in a big book, in fact, it is a big book. And in this book, there are scribes, not in the human form, of course, but there are scribes that record everything we think, say, and do. Even when we think that we're holding it to ourselves. In fact, we're not, because it's being recorded. And because everything is being recorded, even our intentions are recorded. So for example, we may have this idea, let's say, we are upset with someone, and so we want to put salt in their food, or we want to accidentally trip them so they can fall on their face and you can laugh, or we want to tell them something that's going to hurt their feelings, hurt them really bad so you can see them cry, or hurt or harm in some other way. And while we're doing that, we think that even if the person on the receiving end you think deserves it, we are really hurting ourselves. How, you may wonder? Let me explain. So stay with me on this. Because everything that we think, do, or intend is recorded, it means that we are building this resume, this track record about essentially who we really are, this beyond what we may think of ourselves or how we may, imagine or pretend to be to other people, right? There's some people who are very kind and nice, let's say, to children, but they really hate children. Or some people who are pretending to be either wives or husbands, and they really can't stand the other person who is their partner. That kind of performance, right, is all being recorded. And these performances, what they do, are two very important, dangerous things to our being, right? One is that it not only builds this resume and track record, which, by the way, can be corrected, right, if it's not too late. Now, I'll get to that a little bit later. We're building this track record, and in this track record, everything is being sketched out. Everything is being recorded. And in that recording, what we don't realize is that we are building a case against ourselves. Because when it's our time, when our number, right, under our feet, one of your foot, is called, and it's your time for you to leave this human body and to go elsewhere, And I say elsewhere purposely because you may not be going home. But to go elsewhere, it means that at that point, right, there's nothing you can do to change what's been written, because what's been written would be the record that's been weighed against you, right? Very similar to in ancient Egypt and Kemet, where there is this notion of this scale, right? The scale of Ma'at, right, representing truth, justice, reciprocity, all that other good stuff. And your heart is weighed against a feather. The idea being that your heart should be as light as a feather, meaning that you hold no hatred, you hold no grudges, you hold no negativity, you hold the things that will burden and hold down your heart, which represents what? The soul. So your soul is clean, right? Your soul is one that is what? Has been redeemed or is redeemable. And that way, once your heart or your soul is light as a feather, it means you can do what? Pass on to the other world, that being the spiritual world or home, right? Or as we might say, back to the village. Whatever the metaphor may be, the idea is still the same. In that, in this idea, because everything that you have thought, intended, done is recorded, that book, that chapter, or those chapters, depending upon the depth of your behaviors, over your human lifespan, will be essentially the record that will be used to judge you. So you will judge you. And this is why oftentimes we fail to appreciate changing our behavior, changing our attitudes, or transforming, really from inside out, because we think that transformation is like putting on makeup or putting on clothes, that you can just put it on and then you'll become a new person, or changing your name will make you a new person, or changing, where you live, or changing who you befriend. Those things are irrelevant, right? So as you build that resume keeps growing. Now, what you're also doing secondarily, you're building what? Your own demon. That is, you're building your own negative spirit that essentially sometimes can grow so tall, right? 20, 30 feet. If you don't essentially have an intervention or interventions to change course. And so that demon becomes the controlling factor. Ever wonder why you may think or do something and then you catch up on yourself and say, why did I do that? Or I didn't mean to do that. Or man, that was stupid. It's often because you're not in control of the vehicle being you, your body, your brain, your mind. And as such, it is that demon that you have created, right? It is that monster. So we go back to this man who's, I'll leave nameless, that built this resume, right? He was also building this demon. And that demon was a controlling voice in his head to do this, do that. For this reason, for that reason. You want to do it. This is going to help you. This is good. Don't worry. That won't be that bad. Don't worry. All those thoughts, right, are being fed from this negative demonic forces that he's been building. And so in his arrogancy, in his, bravado, in his selfishness, right, in his callous behavior towards other human beings, being family, friends, associates, or otherwise, he's building this resume, building this demon, and both are being what? Weighed against him, affecting him, and putting him into this deep hole. And oftentimes, think of the deep hole as that abyss in that movie Get Out, right? When the main character was sitting back in the chair and being hypnotized, and he fell into a deep hole that he was falling back and could not get out of. That particular abyss is the deep hole that we dig, for ourselves, right? When we think the things that we intend, do, or think will affect only the target of that thinking or that behavior. In fact, we're really affecting ourselves. But there's a third layer to this. True word. You see the forces behind me? So in appropriate fashion, there's a third layer to being negative. Being negative also has a generational effect. That is, the way that you be in the company or in the presence of others, or even by yourself, thinking about negatively others, is that negative energy not only builds a resume, which is the first layer, it only builds this demonic force, which is a controlling force and factor in your life in ways you cannot appreciate. In fact, think about people who, whatever they do, they just can't do right? They have people who, for example, relatives who are just in and out of jail, like it's drinking water, almost a yearly or monthly routine where they're just in and out of jail, they're in and out of trouble, in and out of rehab, in and out of whatever right, conundrum they find themselves in that they just can't control. It is both the resume they've built, and it's a demonic force that they have constructed, and it's a third layer. If they have children, right, or grandchildren, those offsprings and the offspring of those offsprings will what? Receive the weight of that negativity that you have created. That is, the beast or the demonic force you have created will then what? Leapfrog and enter into their world and their beings from a very early age onward, right? And if the grandchildren, the same is true. In other words, the forwarding effect or the ripple effect of our intentions, our thoughts, and behaviors have the generational effect that will ricochet and hit others. And so, for example, let's say, you were a mother or a woman that bear children, cold, callous, with your daughter or son. Guess what's going to happen? That son may never find real love. That son may never find someone that would love him. That daughter may never find nothing but men that abuse, beat, and otherwise ill-treat them. Now, I don't wish for these things, but I'm just giving you the facts, right? Likewise, it may skip, in some cases, it being this cumulative effect of negativity may skip the child or children or the grandchildren or the child and hit the grandchildren. And so they, for example, will suffer, some of the very things that you had created. And so when you are the grandparent looking at them and saying, something will hit you and say, man, I was this callous and arrogant and really selfish person. I look at it, my daughter or my granddaughter or my grandson, or my children, they can't find love. They can't find anyone that can treat them right. They can't find anyone that's going to really, be beholden to them. Someone that's going to be loyal to them. They keep finding these very cold and callous people, and that's when they'll hit you. That essentially what you were, your children will be what experiencing it. Right? Because you see, we human beings, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, beyond our skin, right, at the level of soul and spirit, we are in some ways interconnected, meaning that our intentions, thoughts, and actions have reverberations that are bigger and broader than what we can see and what we can hear, right? What we can essentially sense, right? And as such, being negative, right, has these three major effects. One, it builds a resume and track record, right, that will essentially be the record, the evidentiary dossier that will be used to judge you when it's time for you to go wherever you're going. Two, you're building your own demonic force that's going to overtower you. The more it grows, that is, the more you get older and continue or get triple down or double down on your intentions, your actions, and your thoughts. And three, it will hit generations, right? And even the second generation, right, beyond you, or even sometimes third generation, where you, if you're alive still, will see this, or if you're not alive, you will still be aware of it, that, man, I did this to them, right? And so next time, before you think that your negative act, your ill intent, your behavior, your cold and callousness, even if you don't say it, it's in your head, it's already there. It's already exists. And because it exists, it's part of your record, right? And so here's some things you can do in short order. One, whatever you think, say it, because it's already existing. And because it's already existence, holding it doesn't make it less callous or less consequential, right? So whatever you think, say it, right? And second thing you can do, ask for forgiveness, right? Humbling, the act of asking for forgiveness, both to your creative force of God, but also to yourself, your soul and your spirit, and to the people that you may have offended or hurt or harmed in the process, right? And the third thing you can do, right, is be true to who you are. Because redemption is possible, right? Redemption is possible. And I've seen it in people's lives, right? There are women who, were lifelong prostitutes and they made it back home, right? Because something in them kicked in and they began to devote themselves to a different path once that thing, that was not clicking in terms of, who they really were. And they began to make amends with their own self, right? Their real self, right? And chop the demon down to size And of course, began to what? Write another chapter or other chapters that were what? Both rejuvenating as well as what? Liberating. And once they were free from that particular past, they can make it home. So we all can make it home, but we have to what? Make the choice and make the change. Baba Nyame, I've been your guide and host. Until next time, kindly drop your questions and comments and experiences below. Stay well.